Welcome to Moments with Mary Ann. Now, is it possible to put your life together after it's been completely shattered? I don't know if it is, but today we're going to be talking with Margaret Thomson in regards to her new book, The World Looks Different Now, a memoir of suicide, faith, and family. Now, Margaret is a journalist and TV producer who's reported on a variety of subjects from the Middle East politics to the British royal family. As a radio correspondent for ABC News, she was the first American broadcast journalist to report the end of the Falkland Wars in May 1982. Several years later, she became the first radio correspondent to report on the AIDS epidemic in Africa. Upon returning to the United States in 1992, she taught journalism and television production at the University of Memphis. In 1993, she worked as a production associate on the HBO documentary The Trial of James Earl Ray. Today, Margaret continues to write for print and online publications. So let's welcome to the show, Margaret Thomson.
Thank you, Mary Ann. I'm so glad to be here and just so honored that you would have me on. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, I'm the one who's honored. I have to tell you, once I picked up your book, I couldn't put it down. I mean, I was crying. There are parts of it that are just heartbreaking, but it's so important right now, I think, that people read your book.
Well, thank you. You were so kind. And one of my concerns has been or was as I was writing it, is that I didn't want to upset people. I didn't want to, some people use the word trigger. I didn't want to trigger people who maybe had had traumatic experiences and that sort of thing. But thank you so much for that response. And again, I hope it wasn't too upsetting. It is a little bit intense in places. I realize that. Thank you for that.
Well, I think it needs to be because we really have an authentic discussion here about, suicide and faith and family. There's so much that's involved in this. And so I have to ask you, why did you decide now was the right time to write this book?
Well, it had been evolving. My book had been evolving for quite some time. My son died in 2010. I was working on another memoir at that time, a different memoir. I kind of fixated with memoir, kind of a student of memoir. I love memoir. So I think it's quite a challenge to write a good memoir, readable memoir. I was writing about my earlier life in London as a journalist. But when my son died on August 28th, 2010, of course, I set that aside. I couldn't write anything for weeks or months, or I just set that aside and said, that's never going to happen. That's not going to be finished. And then gradually, after a few months, and I also had a writing coach who was a friend, and she would even come over to my house, kind of like almost literally holding my hand. I just started writing and tried not to put myself under pressure. I had never been a good journaler before. I admire people who are. But of course, I just started taking notes in notebooks and the computer, sometimes longhand, sometimes not. I think that would have been a really good exercise no matter what came out of it, because it's almost like a scrapbook. There's no way I could remember those events now, 10 years, almost 10 years on. So at the end of sort of the first year, I kind of had a rough draft, but it was really rough. And I think having been a journalist, I needed a goal. I couldn't really imagine it being published, or even if that would be a good thing or a bad thing, but I needed a goal of feeling like maybe it would get out there in the world in one form or another, because I knew I had written long form journalism, like 2,000 to 4,000 word magazine pieces. I had done television scripts and radio scripts, but I kind of had this ideal held up in my mind of writing something much longer, like a standard book length is 80,000 words. So it continued to take quite a long time. I think if it had not been so personal, and of course I could not attain objectivity. I wanted objectivity like a reporter, but that I knew was kind of just a total farce. I could not be objective about what had happened in my own life, but I longed for that objectivity. So I longed to step back And really, I think that's the hardest thing when it comes to writing anything, especially the longer it is, the more difficult this aspect is. And that is to know what to put in and what to leave out, what to cut, what to include, what to exclude. So that kept me, I wrestled with that for quite a few years. And then in 2016 or so, around that time, I set everything aside again, put the book aside like I had done with the first one. And my husband and I moved to Middle Tennessee from Memphis. We moved to the Nashville area where our daughter-in-law and our granddaughter, who was our deceased son's only child and was 2 years old at the time of his death, they've been living here ever since his death. And we wanted to have a much closer relationship with them. So as anybody knows who's a writer out there who's tried to write, it creates total havoc when you move. So a lot of writers say, I won't move. I don't care. I'm not upsizing, downsizing. I'm staying where I am because it creates such havoc. So I thought, well, I probably won't finish this. Maybe I don't even want to. So I didn't do anything for another 2 or 3 years. Then I picked it back up. I think it was in 2018, wrote another draft, another revision, but it wasn't too far off what I had written before, and went on from there. So it's kind of a frightening journey, I think, to people if they want to write something. Maybe they could probably do it in a year. The same thing that took me 10 years to do. But you kind of are like that about grief too, I think, that you just can't imagine when you're embarking on this grief journey how long it's going to take, especially if you're a parent or maybe mothers or feel a little bit differently. You can't say to yourself, this is going to take 10 years. Oh, well, no, it's really going to take longer than 10 years. It's going to stay with you and it's going to be with you forever.
Well, I think as we're going through this time, this unique time in history, it's interesting that you really picked up writing your book in 2018. And I know there was a recent report from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention in regards to suicide rates, and saying that since then there's been a 35% increase in rate since 2018. So you look at this and it's like, I think your book, while it was personally driven, will help so many people who are really going through such a difficult time, and really addressing some of the tough questions as, we deal with the ones that we love that have passed, or maybe someone's going through a difficult time and they're considering suicide.
Mm-hmm. I think if I'd set out to write it saying this is going to help someone, I would have been just so intimidated by that idea. Maybe not if I were a professional therapist or in a role like that, but I just had to do it for me. But of course, I would be very gratified if it were helpful to someone in any way. I know it can be painful. I know of a couple here where I live who recently lost their son, and the husband embraced the book. He read it in one night. His wife, when she saw a copy of it at our house, she looked like she was looking at a snake. She was utterly terrified. So I wouldn't want to push it on someone. I think when they get into it and they start reading, they find, okay, I can handle this. But the two issues I had and then did struggle with was, why am I writing? Am I writing this to help someone? Am I really that altruistic a person? I would say probably not, because I can't imagine what will help someone else may be very different from what would help me. So I didn't want to project. I didn't even think about it. I was just in the story and I was writing it in episodes, in scenes, relaying what happened, and not thinking, probably fortunately, is this going to help someone? And then on the other hand, I was also not thinking, is this going to trigger someone? Some people label their work, this work, this piece or this blog post may have triggering material in it. Maybe that's a good idea. I'm not really sure. I just wrote I just wanted to immerse myself. And also, I would say overall, I was searching for meaning, which I don't believe can ever be a bad thing to do, but it was a difficult search or quest or journey. Memoir is often referred to as a journey. I knew that with the subject being suicide and the event having been suicide, the suicide of my older son, that the search for meaning was going to be very frustrating. Some people would say suicide is a very nihilistic attitude, action, that there is no meaning. The people will say it's senseless, it's meaningless. So that search was made difficult for that. But I will say, to quote a great writer and mentor of mine, a great student of memoir, Christine Rayner, who wrote the Bible, the guidebook to writing memoir. It's called Your Life as Story. She says in there that the only meaning one can find from certain events may just be aesthetic. So it's the ability, using memoir, to cultivate the ability to make something beautiful, beautifully crafted, she says, out of what in life was arbitrary, ugly, or painful.
Isn't that the truth? And I love how you weave that together with the faith part in your book, because I mean, there is a lot of faith in your book as you're moving forward through this difficult time. And I don't think anyone ever, completely moves through it. I think when you lose a child, like you were saying earlier, that's with you your entire life.
Yes. I think that could be one of the elements that's just so terrifying, especially to parents. I knew someone whose daughter took her life about 6 months before my own son, and I wrote about that in the book, that I deleted her number from my phone. That was 6 months before my own son died. And I think I say in the book, then, wow, did people delete my number? Are they deleting my number? Or how can I be more compassionate now than I was then? But I do believe that parents and others are terrified. There's the suicide contagion that may be real, the experience that others may do the same thing, that even if you and I are talking about it, like we're talking about it now, that it could prompt someone to do that. I mean, I hope not, because like you, I feel there should be a frank and open discussion of suicide. And maybe somewhere I was reading 100 years ago, it was like this with cancer. People didn't talk about it. They were afraid of it. They thought there was maybe a contagion factor to that. And now, of course, it's discussed much, much more openly. And maybe that will happen. Maybe that will come out of the pandemic. But I hope that it doesn't come out of rising suicide rates. But I think we know that they are rising. And I think I've read the most striking factor causing the rise has to do with economic factors can provoke people to move in that direction. But I think it's an important issue that needs to be addressed. 48,000 Americans died by suicide in 2018, or more if you divide that up, more than 130 people a day, or one every 11 or 12 minutes.
Wow. I mean, those are just staggering.
Yes, the numbers are staggering, and they've been going up. They've been going up steadily. They've been going up in certain age groups, like the 15 to 24s, maybe more. They're going up amongst the military. My son was a soldier in the Army, but I didn't want my book to be just, this is for people in the military, or this is what the military is doing, or this is what they're grappling with. Again, I go back to my mentor, Christine Rayner, saying it's what you're doing is, if I could be so bold, and I don't consider my work art, but it is a piece of art. It stands alone, and it's for people to get out of it what they need to get out of it. Whether if they're a parent, they get something. If they're a military spouse, Maybe they get something else. Mine is not about the loss of a spouse, but maybe they can get something. So I try not to impose any too much of a framework other than a narrative. I am telling a story because I felt that was the only way I could hold people. That if I went into a lot of statistics, like I just recited a few to you, maybe I would lose people. And then you mentioned, very important, the faith piece. I didn't want the book to be categorized as a religion book or religion memoir or on the religion shelf or in a religion bookstore. And not that that would be wonderful and I would be so gratified by that. It was just a piece of our life. It was a thread of those three elements: the suicide, the faith, and family was definitely a major element. And we just relied on our faith, but I wouldn't want to deter a person who was not of the Christian faith or maybe not of any faith or some other belief system. I wouldn't want them to not want to read it or to not get anything out of it. So it's there, but hopefully it's not overbearing or judgmental in any way.
No, I found it was a very nice blending of your story and how you bring this all together so we can have this discussion. Suicide's never the answer to problems. And I just want to share real quick the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. That number is 1-800-273-8255. There's always someone there if you feel like you need someone to talk to. But, I have to ask you, as you were writing this book, did you feel that was cathartic for you in many ways, or how was that?
I think it was, and I think that catharsis is still coming. I think it will really come now that the book is out, and it is still an ongoing, gradual process. I do think if you expect writing something to be that ultimate catharsis or heal you, you might be putting too much pressure on writing or on the act of writing, or have expectations maybe that are too high. I think some of it was healing, but some of it was very difficult, to the point where I would think, do I really need to be doing this? So, of course, you have to take breaks, and maybe that's why it took so long. You have to recharge yourself renew yourself with other activities.
So do you feel that there is a point where your background as a journalist and TV producer kind of took over in your writing?
Oh, yes. I think it was maybe kind of crazy. I was a mother, a grieving mother, but I was trying to establish control. We all want to have an element of control. And a suicide in your family, the suicide of your child, that's probably the most out of control event that you could ever imagine happening. It's like that moment, in keeping with the theme of your show. It's that moment when you receive that news that is the pivot around which the rest of your life will turn forever.
Do you feel that the Army has some blame in regards to your son's death?
I definitely did at the time, because I just wanted to be angry. I wanted to be angry with people. I wanted to find a focus for my anger. And of course, I knew that I was angry with my son. I said that to the chaplain, the military chaplain. I said, I'm just so angry. I'm angry with him, but I said, I'm angry with God. And the Army did not do everything correctly. No one does. No one's perfect, whether they're in the Army or whether they're not, in how they handle things. And I believe when there's been a sudden death or a tragedy like suicide, people aren't going to get things right. I didn't get things right. They're not going to be at their best. They're not going to be acting at their best, behaving at their best, doing the right things. And without giving too much away about the book, I will say that I was not notified in the correct manner. So that kind of threw everything really off kilter. That probably started that anger toward the Army right away, even though I really didn't know too much about the military and how the military operates. And I'd only been on a base twice. I had been to Fort Knox to see my son graduate from basic training. My husband and I went, and our daughter-in-law, and then I had been up to Fort Bragg once before the incident happened. And we were in Memphis, and we flew up there. My husband and I just immediately got any flight we could get, like a flight to Raleigh wasn't even where we needed to be, but to get up there. Because again, I think you want to do something. You're just crawling out of your skin. And that type of description is the sort of thing that, again, may make people feel uncomfortable. And the description of that moment when you receive the news is that again, like the theme of your show, it's that life-changing, life-altering moment, and you want to just rewind the tape. If you're in television or radio, you want to just rewind the tape and go back to where was I, or where was I in those moments before I knew I was this innocent who had no idea what was I doing in those hours, which I describe in those hours before I received that shattering, life-changing news. And again, going back to the journalist thing, I think, especially when I was really young, starting out, and I was working overseas in London at quite a young age. And when you're very young, like say early 20s, mid 20s, you don't think anything's going to happen to you anyway. Whether you go to a war zone or you do this, you get in dangerous situations like covering an IRA bombing or something like that. Those were fairly familiar occurrences for me. But I think as a journalist, you always feel it's not going to happen to me. I'm observing what's going on. I am not going to be a casualty. I'm not going to be injured or killed. So I just think, you had asked me before, and I don't think I gave you a good answer, but I wrapped myself in that cloak after hearing the news, shortly after hearing the news. I would say by the next morning when we had arrived at Fort Bragg, and we were felt like we were on the face of the moon. We didn't know where we were on a mammoth base like that. Then I went into reporter mode. Had my phone, had notebooks, it kind of just gives you something to do. And my husband, I said, please make these calls. I said that in the book. And he says, no, I would, but you wouldn't be happy with what I'm going to say or how I'm going to frame the questions. So you have to do it because you're just going to be so upset with me. So I started calling the whatever they call the MPs, the military police office, just like I would call a police station if I were working as a newspaper reporter in Memphis, Tennessee for the shootings that night. I call the MPs and ask them, what do you know anything about this incident? And so on and so forth. But of course it felt completely crazy making. I should not have been doing that. And I say that in the book. I said, I should be lying in bed at home with people bringing me casseroles and putting cold compresses on my head or something. I should not be here. You're in such a state of shock that literally I've heard that you should not make major decisions, as they tell you, for months, if not years. You need ministering to during that time. But I did put on that journalist mode that gave me the false feeling of control, and it also gave me something to do.
Well, I can definitely understand that because, I mean, I think, just from a soul level, you want to do something so bad, And at the same time, it's like, what could you do? And so falling back on your background and your experience, I think a lot of people would probably try to do that in whatever capacity works for them as well.
Well, maybe it was an understandable response. Again, I was thinking, how am I doing this? How am I standing upright? How am I moving through time and space and going here and going there on this mammoth base, trying to figure out what's going on? And again, at that point in the book, the portrayal of the Army is probably not good. I wouldn't say it's certainly not a revenge portrayal. I wasn't out to just vent about how badly the Army sort of botched certain aspects of it, of the notification and of the handling of the whole situation, because we were in Fort Bragg for about a week. Luckily, it didn't take longer than that to get everything settled. But it really wasn't intended at all to be a venting exercise against the Army, but it felt at the time that we were experiencing avoidance. That's what I believe the suicide loss survivor feels, is people are avoiding me. And maybe they are, maybe they're not. There's a lot going on a huge base with 50,000 soldiers on that base. I'm not sure how many, but a large base. Obviously, we were probably not their top priority, but it could feel, and it did feel like avoidance. And then you go back to, well, what people don't know what to say, and they don't know what to say, and you don't know what to say either. Your reactions might not be appropriate. I give a pass to anybody who is a suicide loss survivor. For example, I know a gentleman who also lost his son. He went out and played golf the day he received that news. And he's the most sensitive, most caring, most kind man. But that was what worked for him. That is how he expressed or expresses himself. So I think people get a pass unless they're doing something that really seems like it's going to injure them, harm them in some way. But later on in the book, the Army becomes more of the hero of the book, which to me is fascinating. I never sat down and planned that. Oh, well, the Army's going to come out looking good in the end. I think it was the result of what happens when you just write and write and write and you let it evolve. You kind of have an idea of where it's going. I think that's helpful to have an outline, to have a narrative arc. Where's it going to go and how's it going to end, kind of thing. But I didn't expect those conclusions to come out, that the Army really ended up being compassionate, some compassionate people who did a lot for me. They did a lot for me by allowing me opportunities to actually speak to soldiers and to do other activities. Again, I don't want to give away too much as far as what happens. I want it to be a compelling narrative read that holds people. But I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful to them. They're wonderful people inside the armed forces and, of course, outside the armed forces. It's just maybe in that moment of tragedy and, again, that pivotal, life-changing moment that people are not really at their best. I wanted to climb out, like I said, climb out of my skin. I wanted to climb out of my life. I wanted to just not be me anymore. I did not want to be the woman, the mother whose child had taken his life. This is not me. This is not who I am. I want another identity. I was used to the identity a long time ago of journalist, of broadcaster, of I gave a lot of that up for both my sons when they were born. For me, it did not work very well as a compatible career with that. So then you adopt the role of mother. Then how do you ever get to the place or adopt the role of bereaved mother again, or bereaved parent, or not excluding the fathers, bereaved spouse? how do you say, this is me? And I think that's what people wrestle with. And that's what takes so many years to kind of let that evolve into acceptance.
So, for people who are going through grief right now, what is one thing you would like them to take away from your book?
I would like for them to take away that there is hope. There will be hope. That suicide, again, I think people shun it, steer away from it, avoid it, because it seems like the erasure of hope. But there is hope, and life does go on. It will go on. Even when I had a friend who had a son who died 10 years before mine of suicide, and I was, how is she still living? How is she still going through this? So she was kind of like hope personified for me, and that there will be closure. That same friend who had lost her son 10 years prior to mine, and I just did not believe her when she said, time is your friend. It sounded like such a cliche, but it's not. I think time is your friend, but you have to use it. You have to do something with it. I think you have to kind of grab it and be a little bit proactive, and not just say, okay, time's going to wash over me and it's going to heal everything. But time will give you that partial closure, I believe, and you may not even want full or complete closure. I think a lot of mothers, myself included, and I've been writing about this, what is closure? And I wrote at one point, I said, it's blasphemy to a mother. You don't want yourself or the world, and you will never forget your child, but it's just a horror to think my child is not remembered. Like, I have the 10th anniversary of my son's death coming up, but I probably won't. I may not even post anything about it on Facebook, because people will probably, or you're still worrying what people think. Oh, here she goes again, another anniversary. But you will, I believe, the suicide loss survivors, even when that loss is their child, they will eventually have the degree of closure that they need and want.
Well, I think any way you choose to remember your son is going to be honored by so many people who are either going through grief of their own or know the loss of a child and going through that grief as well. I think it will help a lot of people, just open the discussion and start having the conversation about their grief, because being stuck in grief is a really horrible place.
Yes, it is. And that may be a situation where a person does need professional assistance of some kind to get out of that stuck place. It certainly is something to be avoided, and to know, or hopefully have people around you who can sense that maybe you need some kind of assistance to move out or move through it. I think at times maybe I was stuck, but I kept writing and I kept going, which seemed to work for me. Again, I wouldn't recommend it for everyone. I went to groups too. I went to Compassionate Friends, which is a nationwide group for parents who've lost children. I went to a suicide support group run by the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, AFSP. So those groups were there, they are there. I think they can help. Even when you think they're not going to help, they can help.
Well, Margaret, where can our listeners connect with you and learn more about your book and your work and be part of your community?
Well, I would be thrilled if they would like to be in touch with me through my website, which is Margaret Riley Thomson, last name spelled THOMSON.com, no P in Thomson. And my middle name is in there because I do have a lot of journalism, or have had in the past, that was under my maiden name, Riley. And that same name is also my handle, I guess you call it, for LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. I also have a Facebook page that's called Journalist Margaret Riley Thomson, and my Twitter handle is M. Riley Thomson.
Well, Margaret, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thank you so much, Marianne. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Well, thank you, Margaret. It has been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, The World Looks Different Now, a memoir of suicide, faith, and family. The World Looks Different Now is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie bookstores. And if you don't see it on the shelf, ask for them to order it. And of course, it's available on Kindle. Again, if you'd like to reach out to Margaret, you can at margaretrileythompson.com for more information. Also, if you need help, know that you're not alone. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is available 24 hours a day, both in English and Spanish. And that number is 1-800-273-8255. Again, that number is 1-800-273-8255. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Sunday, Monday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.